Hey, you guys, this is Count It All Joy here. I just want to talk to you for a second. I was reading James chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. Humility cures worldliness, and it reads, for the New King James Version, therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning, and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. So previously, in chapter 4 in James, the Lord was, talking about how this, pride. Um, verse 2 in James chapter 4, you lust and do not have, you murder and covet and cannot obtain, you fight in war, yet you do not have because you do not ask. And you ask and do not receive because you ask that you may spend it on your pleasures. Whoever is a friend of the world makes himself the enemy of God. And also down in verse 5, the spirit who dwells in us yearns jealously. Verse 6, God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. We all make mistakes, and I know in our wilderness period that we will make mistakes, and sometimes even the most humble and meek can become very proud, prideful, puffed up, and a lot of times it's due to insecurities. It could be also persecution, not knowing what to do when it's hard to trust God. And we will suffer consequences. Sometimes the Lord will, rescue us right in the nick of time, but there are also those times where we will have to suffer the consequences for our actions, but He will provide a way for us. He always does, but we have to face His judgment. His judgment is righteous, okay? And what happens with that judgment and those consequences is he chastises us. The Lord chastises those he loves. So what happens is we won't make that same mistake. It can be very painful, very, very grueling, especially when you're making decisions, sinful decisions based on hurt and pain. If you would have just had this, if you would have just had that. But remember, submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. And a lot of the saints, we are cycling around in our wilderness, going from mistake to another because we simply just refuse to submit to God. We will do just enough to obey for that moment, to make it from point A to point B, but we are not submitted. And when we are under a attack from the devil and from the enemy, um, he tricks us. I mean, he does. He gets. Sometimes he tricks us. Sometimes we get in our own way and we don't expect it, and we think as we shrug off procrastination is not a big deal. Well, I'll do it later. The Lord told you to do this, and then other times you didn't do it right away. Okay, it was fine. It worked out, but in this particular situation, you disobeyed. Okay, you have grace, but in this particular situation it went wrong. You didn't get that pass that you usually get. The Lord is asking us to come up higher, and also measuring our worth to our possessions and our desires. And we have prayers and we're not asking for what we really need, but it's what we desire and what we want. Okay. The Lord will always provide you with what you need. And when you're hung down and hurt over something that you desire and don't have, it can feel like ingratitude because one of the fruits of the spirit is patience. So we patiently wait. A lot of saints, where you're just still in your waiting period. Don't rock the boat. Continue to obey. And what happens is we read our Bible, we go to church, and we're hoping and we're wishing, but we're not submitted to God. So when the devil comes, with his tactics and with the spiritual warfare, we slip up and we don't take it serious. Okay? In verse 8 it says, and purify your hearts, you double minded. If you are double minded and expecting blessings from the Lord, That's a contradiction. Okay. And even if we don't get a consequence, and even if we don't face a judgment, we still want to war in the spirit. We want to prevent, any type of issue and enmity with, against God. We want to prevent that. We don't want to you get comfortable and complacent. There's all this talk about, a spiritual warfare and attacks, but we're not submitted to God. Submit first. We have to submit and stay submitted. And when you submit, you won't have to worry about the double-mindedness, because the conviction of the Holy Spirit will guide you. If you're not submitted and you feel convicted, you will ignore the Holy Spirit. Okay. And you will take it, and just think, okay, well, I'll just do it later. God understands. And no, that's just not going to work. There is a time and a place for everything. And when God is asking you to fast, ask you to read, ask you to war in the spirit, you need to do it immediately, not just out of obedience, but to protect yourself from the enemy. Staying away from sin and, trying to be a good person, that's not going to cut it to resist the devil, not in these evil times. Okay. So the Lord chastises those he loves. He disciplines those he loves. So here in verse 9, lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. So when you make a mistake and you're under judgment, okay, and God is fixing you and he's pruning you. I know it don't feel good. This is a good time to humble yourself. This is a good time to humble yourself and to not only turn away from that sin, but to not cycle back around. This is probably your third, fourth, fifth time in warning. But as long as we do a little bit here, a little bit there to get through our day, we feel we're good, and that's deception. We feel because the devil's not messing with us, we're fine because of how we feel. You should always obey the Lord right then and there. Yes, he will protect us. Yes, we have grace, but we want to resist the devil. And being disobedient, even a little bit, is not resisting the devil. It's giving him a foothold. And anytime you're warring in the spirit, that's the last thing you want to do. I don't care how difficult it is to follow those instructions that God has given you, to drop that sin. It's going to become way more difficult when God finds you prideful in his eyes and boastful in his eyes and not humble in his eyes. He is going to have to prune you. He's going to have to judge you. He is going to have to do it, and it's going to be very difficult. So lament and mourn and weep. The verse says it. That's exactly what you're going to be doing. Okay, and let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. So that high is going to low. All right, and but verse 10, here's the recipe, and here is the solution to this problem. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. You don't need another prophetic word. You don't need to just sit around and wait around and say all these prayers over and over, repetitive prayers, hoping that he will fix you. Lord, I'm going to do right. Your solution is to humble yourself in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. Humble yourself. Do not come with excuses. Wrong is wrong. Doesn't matter what the world says. Doesn't matter what your feelings says, what your thought says. Humble yourself before the Lord. Submit to God. Resist the devil. Procrastination, laziness, slothfulness, not taking care of your responsibilities, putting things off, waiting to the last minute just because you will do it later. That's not resisting the devil. And it's also not submitting to God. Okay? Saints, we're having it's very thick, and there's a lot of tests and trials. And when we are facing consequences for decisions we make, when we feel we're stuck and we didn't have a choice, and it's painful, and it makes it even more hurtful. Like, Lord, what was I supposed to do? I want to obey you, but I can't make this decision. And it's just, and you just go on, and just out of insecurity, you just become prideful. You know what? I'm just going to forget it. And you don't want to do that. Submit to God. Submit. Humble yourself and he will lift you up. Okay? The Lord discipline those he loves and keep that in mind. Okay? So this is just a message from Count It All Joy Ministries. I wish you well. God bless.